Okay.
Welcome to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. We discuss 5 questions in about 10 minutes, and I am very excited to introduce our guest today. This is Dani Kimlinger, and she is the CEO of Mines and Associates out of Littleton, Colorado. Dani, thank you so much for being on the show today. What would you like the people to know about either yourself or Mines and Associates?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. And it's really great to be here. So Minds is a national business psychology firm. So we provide behavioral health services as well as organizational development services, both nationally as well as actually we're getting our footprint internationally as well in the last couple of years. So
Well, that's exciting. You're able to expand a little bit. That's awesome.
yes.
Very good. Well, Dani, thank you again. Let's jump to our questions. Our first question, share with the audience an example of collaboration within a team that you've experienced.
Sure. So part of what we do is we provide services and respond to tragedies across the country and across the world, actually. So any of the, national shootings that you've heard about, or any of the just actually could be layoffs, any sort of disruptive work event or community event, we provide counselors to provide, process groups and critical stress debriefing. Well, a few months ago, a tragedy, of course, happened here, at the King Soopers in Boulder. We had a shooting. This isn't uncommon for us to respond to. However, it was really interesting from a collaboration perspective how this played out. We've been we're still actually pretty remote right now, with some people coming in just flexibly, but during the tragedy, we were really remote, and it was just really powerful to me to see different people across the organization making suggestions as to how to respond. So not just having the counselors on site to different organizations that were impacted, we were doing that, but we also had people from our call center, let's say, who contacted us and said, hey, have we thought about the reporters who may have responded to, mass tragedies in the past and how the secondary trauma might be affecting them? Have we thought about, since we are virtual right now and most of the world is virtual right now, have we thought about maybe having process groups or support groups that people can access? Because not everyone works for a company that can offer counseling on site, those kinds of things. So the collaboration piece, it was just so powerful. I felt like it really brought us even closer together. And I loved that we had people from all over the organization who were willing to bring their suggestions and thoughts and creativity. So, and then people that offered to spend their nights and weekends, because we actually had process groups that we offered virtually on the nights and weekends for people that maybe couldn't attend during the workday. And these were anonymous, supportive, so on and so forth. So that's a recent example of collaboration that was really powerful. Just really pretty amazing, different lenses from around the organization.
Well, and that's such a fantastic example because you did have input from different areas within the company. And that's the epitome of what collaboration should be, is the opportunity to hear from different perspectives, as you pointed out, and hear what different ideas people see from their point of view on how it's affecting the people that you work with. So that's a fantastic example. I really appreciate you sharing that. Question number 2, I hear from other leaders of teams that it can be a challenge to measure engagement. Tell us your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, all right. So I have an HR background. And so measuring engagement has always been something that's come to the table of, how do we measure engagement? And, we're bringing on these new services or tools or programs. Like, how do we make sure that people are engaged and they're enjoying them and appreciating them and all those things? So I think there's the objective ways that we do that. Employee engagement, satisfaction surveys would be an example. I think we get some information from things like exit interviews, stay conversations, those things. But I also think that, in my opinion, maybe not the most popular opinion on this, I think that the subjective hints and nudges that we get as leaders about engagement, they're more powerful, and I think they're more telling. And they also allow you to react in real time. So give you an example that's a little more concrete. I think that, if you are holding meetings and your team members are all participating, they're positive, they're creative, they're thinking through things, they're offering their input, expertise, that's a good sign of engagement. I think then also, though, if you see that there are people who are coming to the meetings, they're not ready, they seem distracted, maybe they're negative, so on and so forth, I think that's an opportunity to check in with them directly. and see what their thoughts are. I'm also, Sean, a really big fan of one-on-one meetings regularly. So, we do this in our organization, did this before the pandemic, but it's become even more important. So every week, anyone that directly reports to us, we're having at least a 30-minute meeting with that staff member. And even if we don't have an agenda, there's still an expectation that there's a connection. So you might be talking about your, employees' kids being sick, having a cold, or, the next PTO opportunity. But just having that connection allows for you to pick up on some of those hints around engagement and, and make changes quickly versus waiting for that survey and then trying to figure out where and when to go.
You've really detailed very, very well, in my view, how to use the tools and like the surveys and those kinds of things, but use those as a springboard to lead into the discussion, whether it's small group, whether it's one-on-one. I love how you describe that, because I completely agree with you, by the way. You need both. You can't just have the one tool and assume that you've got it all. That's one way to measure, but nothing's ever going to be one-on-one interaction. And so I love how you described that whole process of how you walk through that. It's a great comment. Question number 3, excuse me, Dani, based on your experience, is there an attribute or a quality of a confident leader that you'd like to share?
So this is a really interesting question. I think that a characteristic that I find really powerful about leaders that can be hard to get to as a leader, and I'll say that it was hard for me, is vulnerability. And what I mean by vulnerability, I guess, is assessing what you're good at, what you're not good at, and being very clear about that, and then ongoingly assessing that. Why is that so important? I think that we have teams. If we were able to do all the work in the world as one person, then we wouldn't need a team, but we have teams. And it's good to be clear about, what you're not good at. So I am much better with big picture, strategic kind of things. It's also where I energize, I have fun. I love talking and thinking through those things. But if you ask me to implement it and think about every single person it's going to impact and how it's going to impact them, I'm going to miss steps, I'm going to miss people, and it's going to be a mess. So it's good for me to know that about myself and to bring people in who are more operationally minded, more cognizant of those things. And then we can do really well as a group together. But it's important not just to bring them in, but to let them know, why they're there. So I make jokes with my team. I'm like, well, I need someone who thinks about these things, because if I'm in this meeting with this client and we're talking about how to implement this on an on-site clinic, there could be some things missed here. So I think it's important to do that, but it also takes some courage. Frankly, I think once you do it a couple times, I think it becomes more comfortable. Yeah. I have no concerns about sharing. I'm vulnerable. And I think you just have, but the other piece is I think you have to continuously watch it too and reevaluate. So
I like that. I like the vulnerability aspect. I like the ongoing awareness. I mean, there's a lot of different words that can describe what you're talking about, but I love that word vulnerability. And I think that's a great thing it's a great quality or attribute for leaders to really keep in mind, is to be aware of your own strengths and weaknesses and where those vulnerable areas exist. I think that's a great comment. Great comment.
We cannot be good at everything. That's for sure. So
well, and nor should we try to be good at everything.
Yes,
be good at what you're be really good at what you're good at, and
yes.
Let other people be really good at what they're good at. And that's the whole benefit of having a team. So yeah, great comment. Question number 4, is there someone that you'd like to recognize that has had a positive influence in your life?
Yeah, so I've been really fortunate. I feel like I've had, personally and professionally, I've had so many that have been impactful and have made a difference. I think that one person I would like to recognize is my business partner, Bob. We've worked together it'll be 13 years here in about 2 weeks. And so we've worked together for a long time. And I think personally and professionally, I've grown a lot with him. He and I are pretty different. We have different skill sets and attributes, but we have some parallels too. We both love spending time in the big picture visionary piece, but how we get there and what we want to spend our time doing is different. I'd say academically, he's always been a really big support of mine. So I started at Mines when I finished my bachelor's degree, and then, got my master's as well as PhD while working here. And I feel like we were able to evolve my position accordingly. So, when I was working on my MHA, there was an accounting stint, and never in my life would I ever apply for an accounting job, but there was an opportunity for me to have kind of a rotating opportunity there due to someone being out of the office for some time. So, by the way, that was my worst ever kind of opportunity to hang out in business accounting, not me, but it was a really good opportunity. And I learned a lot from him, and just, how he works with people. He's a universal personality, gets along with everybody, can make, he's a psychologist by training. So you'd expect probably that he would have some skills there, but he's been very impactful, and has become a really, really good friend as well over the years. So
that's awesome. Thank you for recognizing him and how he has contributed in a positive way to your life. So that's a great example. Well, our last question, Dani, tell us a little bit about your first job.
Okay, so my first job, I had two. So I started pretty young modeling, which, that was kind of, I guess, my first paid job. Although I think that the position that when I think about my first job, I really think about my first job at Subway. So I worked at Subway when I was 17 years old, and, I moved up pretty quickly to be an assistant manager, so on and so forth. I actually only worked there 8 months, but it was an interesting experience. We worked with different kinds of people and whatnot. I decided pretty early on in there that maybe some of the food service stuff wasn't my, area of talent, expertise, those kinds of things. Also, the hours were challenging, but I that's where I learned that I wanted to be in a leadership role down the line, because I think when I moved into that assistant management role, I felt like I was in a position where I could remove barriers. I could, I could advocate, so, maybe this employee gave someone 4 pickles instead of 3, which, is something that's expected, but, they made this client or this patron's experience really positive. And so, I think being able to verbalize that, so on and so forth, was really important, and learned a lot of other things too, like logistics of, working in a store. So I would say that was probably that I think about that as my first job, even though I guess technically was my second. So.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. And that's part of the fun of this particular question, is that a lot of times the guests are asking, well, what do you mean by my first job? Is it the first, W-2 job? Or are we talking about when I was a babysitter or mowing lawns or whatever it was?
Yeah.
But what I love about your answer, Dani, is that you shared why and what you learned from the job. And that's really kind of what we're hoping to pull out of that question is, what are some things that you learned from that first job that influenced where you're at now? So I love that you talked about the leadership aspect, and that's now led to where you are now as a very successful leader of your company. So that's fantastic. Dani, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. How can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I have a pretty unique name. So, Dani, D-A-N-I, Kimlinger, K-I-M-L-I-N-G-E-R. And I think I'm probably the only one on there. Also, you can, link with me there. Twitter, same thing. My handle's Dani Kimlinger. I'm here if I can help or support you in any way.
Fantastic. Thank you. This is Sean Richards with the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. For more ideas, you can go to teamengagementpodcast.com. Again, teamengagementpodcast.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel where you can watch the videos. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day.